And you realize that the women who were not participating in these kinds of groups, the cooperatives, they were more prone to moving in a short time of 0 to 5 years, for example. They could move a lot. One would move like, you find someone moving like 7 times in 2 years. And yet, those who were having that attachment to the groups, their movement was a bit more curtailed. So I realized there was a linkage there between involvement in these groups. And the mode of operation of these groups, of the cooperatives, someone had to continue contributing some money for some years, 20 years or something, in addition, of course, to the activities of the group. And the group buys for them some land on the periphery of the city. So they really had a reason why they should be nearby. It was a different story with the peripheral case study area, where the issue of housing was not a core into the socioeconomic group discussions. So you realize that they were attracted to deal with issues of credit and even the groups, the mortality was low, they could just collapse because of those, the lack of the bonding system, like unlike the other issues for housing. So the mobility itself of the households and the attractiveness of the people to be in these groups for a long time was a bit limited. Social networks and affiliation. There was a relationship between social networks, location choice, and the mobility, the location. And they realized that there was a spatial proximity between the female-headed households and their hosts, those who attracted them to come to the settlement. And the hosts comprised of the family, tribemates, relatives, and some friends. Now, these relationships or the networks that existed were in 3 forms. One, between hosts and the new households. With time, this relationship of these two there were experiences where I found that they eventually reciprocated the relationship. Someone who was earlier a host became now a hosted person after some time, the reciprocation. Then we had relationships between the households and other households who were not necessarily the hosts, and then the relationship with the socio-economic groups. On the other side, the networks were thicker and more controlled because there was a family bonding. This settlement here has a history of particular families staying up to, they started staying in it in the days when it was very urban. It wasn't urban, it was just being used for farming, and a few households were occupying it. But with this urbanization in the 90s, urbanization found it, and the families, some of the families remained there. So they start bonding, comprising its history, which is unlike the other metropolitan, like they call it metropolitan. There was also mutual support among them. And the neighborhood drivers, these ones briefly, they were patriarchal stereotypes that curtailed these people's mobility, where the find the challenge making their own decisions being forced by some relatives. That mapping tries to illustrate the connection between the female-led households and their hosts. The blue is for hosts, the yellow is for hosts, and the blue, there is a line that connects these two. They could easily locate their hosts. That's the meaning of this mapping, that the network could easily be tracked by these households. Now the market, there were unique modalities of this, how they would access the housing. They would pay 3 months in advance. That was common to many new tenants. But there was an important element of house sharing. It was pushed by 2 different unique items. House sharing in Katwe was because their economic ability was low, so they could only manage the rent by staying together. 3 households staying in 1 unit. And you will find some of them paying rent per day in that shared room. But the house sharing in the periphery on the other side was mainly involved in the young households, the young adults, the youth who were starting a life, who have just started a life, but they wanted company in their responsibility because of company, not because they cannot pay the rent. The market information flow was so informal but well lit. The actors included the local leaders, the hosts, the friends, and some landlords who have been there for some time. They could, and the brokers. So they could, that illustration shows how the information was interplaying among these actors. And it was so organized, however, it would limit someone from getting information outside that network because they could simply trust the sources. And at the end, they would lose out millions in the The land values, the land prices, they were high. Since 2001, when you could track the prices of the land from that time, right now it has increased 10 times. Now, such a price was not, affordable to a low-income family. So the initiatives, that meant that the initiatives for their housing access was either to help them to access rental housing or buy land outside the city, like this cooperative deals. Housing pathways. The housing pathway trajectory was like fourfold. Shift from the village, being accommodated by the government, shift to rental, buy your own house. However, the different pathways that I discussed in my thesis somehow had different stages and components, and it was fluid. The other trajectory I have read for you, I got it from the region, both from Sub-Saharan Africa and also somewhere in Europe. But we find for these women, some of the make this trajectory not to be clear cut. They were influenced by some dynamics, especially whom she deals with, and the socioeconomic, how she gets involved from time to time. So, grounding the theory, like I said earlier, I used the social concepts of reciprocity, membership groups, community participation, trust, and the network accounts. This allowed an alternative understanding, an alternative perspective of this housing choice, driving away from the economic fundamentals of the rationality, as suggested by Alonso and these other economic scholars. So there were evident tribal clusterings, engagement in socio-economic groups by these women, and the social capital network and the livelihood framework were guided in discussing the special relationships of these female households and their hosts, and their participation in the property market. So these networks were evident, and you could not get these explanations if you were doing it economically or based on big data. The social network theory is aided in the mapping of some of these networks and get the explanations. Pre-conceptual contributions. One, I have realized that channeling and disseminating property market information in informal settlements does not necessarily have to be through rigidly mapped networks and the future set people. The credibility and reliability of this market information within this close-knit network, I realize that it poses a risk to get the best preferred housing, because some of it could be on the market, but this person is limited by the close-knit information through a network. Another identification here, the forms of social capital network and relationships, and how they influence how this location shows. It metamorphoses over time. When you look at the young female-headed households, their social capital was not, you couldn't physically track it. Some of it was cyber. Their closest friend was 10 kilometers away. They did not want to do anything with the neighbor. So some of these metamorphoses. The tendencies of house sharing, it was a new aspect driven by different things, not necessarily by economic inability, especially for this new demographic of the young households. This implies that obtaining thorough understanding of these relationships among such households, based on established local social capital, neighbor, parent, may be unrealistic, because some of these demographics, their clusters are away from where. 3, men differed from female spouses in their housing preferences. There was that small component among my respondents of the married women in the household, with spouses in the household. I took a chance to ask those males, and you could see a difference. So which means there was a uniqueness among the preferences of these women. Unlike the economic theories, households do not necessarily depend on state sector for livelihood.